Greetings once again, poetry lovers, for our penultimate video lesson on the poetry of Thomas Hardy and the penultimate poetry lesson period for the year, because we are done with poetry. As sad as that makes me, I'm sure that you are jumping for joy. Alright, so there's Thomas Hardy himself, a dapper looking man with a handlebar mustache. So let's talk about his poem, Ah, Are You Digging on My Grave? So this is one of the examples of Hardy's penchant for employing unusual speakers there in his poetry. And so here we have two speakers, one a dead person, and then we have a speaker that is alive, and we'll come to that in a moment. Ah, are you digging on my grave? Ah, are you digging on my grave, my loved one, planting rue? No, yesterday he went to wed, one of the brightest wealth has bred. It cannot hurt her now, he said, that I should not be true. Then who is digging on my grave? My nearest, dearest kin? Ah, no, they sit and think, what use, what good will planting flowers produce? No tendance of her mound can loose her spirit from death's gin. But someone digs upon my grave. My enemy, prodding sly? Nay, when she heard you had passed the gate that shuts on all flesh soon or late, she thought you no more worth her hate, and cares not where you lie. Then who is digging on my grave? Say, since I have not guessed. Oh, it is I, my mistress dear, your little dog who still lives near, and much I hope my movements here have not disturbed your rest. Ah, yes, you dig upon my grave. Why flashed it not on me that one true heart was left behind? What feeling do we ever find to equal among humankind a dog's fidelity? Mistress, I dug upon your grave to bury a bone, in case I should be hungry near this spot when passing on my daily trot. I'm sorry, but I quite forgot it was your resting place. All right, so let's take a look at the some of the particulars of the poem. So as you now know, we've got two speakers, and there are other people who are given voice throughout the poem. But it is an interchange between I suppose the corpse of a dead person and a dog. And so why don't we take a look at some of the particular features here in this poem as we go forward. Oh, by the way, the annotations, and I will ask you about this on the video. The annotations today are brought to you by the Musgrave Test Scoring 100. Made by the good old folks over in Shelbyville, Tennessee. Makes a nice dark mark. So if you want to use this for future tests. Okay, so you're going to want to go ahead and say you've got two speakers. So sort of speaker one is going to be your dead woman, and speaker two is her dog. All right. Now, one of the things that you want to take a look at is from a meter standpoint. The poem alternates in not only in the speaker back and forth, but also in terms of the rhymes and the metrical pattern. So if we take a look at the rhyme scheme, then you're going to want to notice that it goes A, B, and then we have a triplet C, C, C. And then it links back to the B line. Okay? In terms of the number of syllables, it goes 8, and then 6, and then 8, 8, 8, and then it drops down to 6. Now this pattern is not consistent throughout the poem. There's some places where it varies, and we'll take a look at what happens in the places where you have more syllables than are in this basic, the fundamental pattern that he establishes at the beginning. So in each of the stanzas until we get toward the end, you've got speaker one will ask the question, and then the response comes from speaker 2, the dog. All right. Ah, are you digging on my grave, my loved one planting rue? No, yesterday he went to wed. One of the brightest wealth has bred. It cannot hurt her now, he said, that I should not be true. So your pattern then is iambic, again largely, iambic tetrameter. Go ahead and move this over. And iambic trimeter. So because you've got the rising meter, so I'm going to ask you a question about this. I'm going to ask you a question about the who the speakers are. I'm going to ask you a question about the pencil. Okay, so so this interlocking, this sort of interchange, the whole thing is about dialogue. And so from here, the only you find this poem as being particularly devoid of any sort of color imagery or anything of that nature. The only thing that you've got by way of color image is in the reference to the rue, and you know from your note then that this is a yellow flowered herb that's traditionally emblematic of sorrow. You'll recall that that Ophelia gave Gertrude some rue. And so I might ask a question about about this just for fun, namely that there's Ophelia sort of going mad, and she would give Gertrude the rue in sort of remembrance of the sorrow for her father. Okay, but this is the only thing that's nearing a sort of color image, really, in the whole poem. Because what Hardy is doing there is creating a relatively bleak scene for our perusal. Let me go ahead and stick that under there. Maybe it'll be a little easier for us to deal with. There we go. Okay, so then who is digging on my grave? So let's take again. You've got the A. So it's grave, kin, use, produce, and then loose. There's a nice rhyme there. And then gin. Okay, so a couple things. We're still with that pattern of the 8, 6, 8, 8, 8, and then 6. One feature that's worth noting, and I think I'm going to back off this a little bit. Here we go. Okay, give me some more room to write. We've got nearest and dearest. So this is, of course, an example of internal rhyme. So you might ask yourself, what's that doing there? Or what's it doing for us? So it's used here for grace and for the sort of musical quality. So it's an aesthetic element. The rising meter of the piece, as we had discussed with earlier poems, the Ruined Maid in particular, is that sort of upbeat rising meter stands in counterpoint to the subject matter. Which in this case is the idea, it's speaking sort of directly to the idea of the afterlife and about people who are dead being mourned by those they have left behind. And as we can see here, there's no such thing as that. No one is commemorating the death of this woman who is our speaker. Okay, so it's used for grace. You can say, maybe if you want to do it this way, sort of the musical quality of it, okay? And again, counterpoint to to the subject matter. All right, so here we have, what good will planting flowers produce? No tendance of her mound can loose her spirit from death's gin. So this business here about the sort of futility of paying homage to the dead body. Okay, and then we've seen this quite a bit in other poems, so let's go ahead and make a point of it here. So death, the personification of death here. All right, so death has been personified. So what's the point of it? Well, it makes the abstract nature of death more concrete. Okay, it's especially make abstract one's own death. More concrete. He'll do this again, and so the idea is that death is a trap here. That the Grim Reaper ensnares you somehow, and takes you away from the living to wherever it is that that you pass through. An idea that is going to, of course, be touched on here then in the next sestet. So I'm probably going to ask you another question about that. So how many sestets do we have? And it's 6. So we have that symmetry there of 6 line stanzas. Okay. Now you'll notice here that we've got and grave. So if you want to think of grave as a refrain line, that's perfectly okay. And then so you've got grave and sly, and then gate and late and hate, and then lie. Okay. One of the things that's different here is the syllable count. So it goes 8 to 7 to 9 then, and then to 8 and 8 and 6. So as I've said before, whenever there's an aberration of this sort, then you have to ask yourself the question, like, what's going on there? Like, why is it that we have a slant rhyme, or why is it that we have a weird number of syllables, or why is the meter broken down? It's because here we have that regular meter, the regular syllable count in the first 2 stanzas now starts to break, the first 2 stanzas breaks down in the third. Because here's the idea, that you'd think that if the digging on my grave at first the speaker thinks is to pay, homage to her by planting flowers, okay, to commemorate her. And, of course it's not. Okay, so nobody's planting rue in remembrance, to commemorate the sorrow. Nobody's planting the nice flowers that are going to grow up and give us some hope. Instead, it's like, okay, so if it's not my lover, if it's not my friend, then it must be an enemy who is coming to desecrate my burial place. Nay, when she heard you had passed the gate. If you'll just take a look at at just how messed up the meter is. But someone digs upon my grave, my enemy prodding sly. Nay, when she heard you had passed the gate that shuts on all flesh sooner or late. Okay, so we're going to underline that. The gate that shuts on all flesh. So the concept of a threshold for that death is somehow, you hear people say that someone is at death's door. So because we, although Christians believe, other faith traditions believe that there's an afterlife of some sort, those who were followers of the god Odin, for example, in sort of Northern European Viking traditions, believed that they would go to Valhalla when they died, and and the Romans believed that you would go to Elysium and these sorts of things, but that there's a threshold over which you have to pass. So in lots of traditions, you go across the river Styx, again as the idea that you're passing from one sort of realm to another. And so here, when we've got the gate that shuts on all flesh, so flesh then, of course, being an example of what? Synecdoche. All right, because it's not shutting just on the flesh. And then, so like I said, the concept of the threshold via a door is common because it's an effort to express the inexpressible. All right, I might ask you to unpack the implied metaphor here. So it's basically death would be the tenor, and then the vehicle is going to be the gate. All right. Okay, so let's see here. Then let's go ahead and push on down to the end. Then who is digging on my grave? Say, since I have not guessed. Oh, it is I, my mistress dear, your little dog, who still lives near. And much I hope my movements here have not disturbed your rest. Okay, so the business of, ah yes, you dig upon my grave. Why flashed it not on me? We often think of insight as being like light. Emily Dickinson did this quite a bit in her poetry. And so this is insight as being equated to a flash of light. Yeah. Okay, now, the one true heart. So two things are happening here. One is that it's synecdoche plus its personification. You see that? So it's the heart of the dog, and the dog's being personified as one who is caring for, in an effort to commemorate then the dead mistress. And so this is this combination sets up the audience for a move towards sentimentality. The poor woman, I mean, nobody's there to tend it. The dog shows up. It's like, oh God, at least somebody loves me. Only to be then crushed, and all of us then are crushed. That if even a dog doesn't care for you, then who does? So it's a very bleak outlook, not just sort of emptying a nostril at the concept of the afterlife, but doing so in a way that it seems a little bit nihilistic, the sense that life has no meaning, that you've lived your whole life, and when you're dead, no one's going to remember you. So you remember Thomas Gray in the poem "The Elegy in a Country," written in a country churchyard. It's that same idea that these people, if they had been born somewhere else, in a city or what have you, given some education and things of that nature, that perhaps their lives would have been noteworthy. Thomas Hardy would disagree with that sense of things, that someone from the country wouldn't be worth, worthy of remembering, and should not be, would be held in the same, like you have to. He would think that you don't have to move to a city or be involved in great things to have lived a fulfilled life and be considered a fine human being, because again he grew up with those sorts of people. So here the hyperbole. With what feeling do we ever find to equal among humankind a dog's fidelity? So this hyperbole accentuates the earnest belief that at least a dog loves us. And yet, Hardy crushes that idea there at the end. And it was your resting place. So notice there's that euphemism for, for you, the place where you have been shoved into the ground and covered up with earth. So again, I think this speaks to the idea that, and even if you want to take a look at the at one of the patterns that we looked at before, in terms of the number of beats per line, it's 8, and then it's 7, and then it's 8, 8, 9, and then 6. I am sorry, but I quite forgot. Discordant and an extra syllable, again, to accentuate how unrealistic is the belief of not just this speaker, but of all humans, that they are going to be commemorated when they're dead. So, it's a sort of bleak kind of poem, and you might find it to be a little bit funny, but it's definitely the sort of ironic humor that is characteristic of Hardy.